Hello everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of August. I read 11 books in the month of August, which is a pretty successful reading month for me, and I even read 2 of those books twice, so technically I read 13 books. I just read 2 of them twice, and then I also read a big chunk of another book that I'm going to be continuing on later. But let's go ahead and jump into what I read this month. I'm going to start with the lowest rated books and then go to the highest rated books. I didn't have any DNFs this month, but I did start Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, and this is not going to be an official DNF for me. I'm just going to finish it later. I found that I really wasn't in the mood for this one. It is a little bit chunkier than, not that this is a chunky book by any means, but it is chunkier than Agatha Christie's other books that I've read by her, and I felt like the first half of this book was just really slow. Nothing was going on, and it wasn't holding my attention, so I decided that I wasn't in the mood and I was going to put it down for now. But I will finish this by the end of the year, so I'm not officially marking this as a DNF, but I made it 176 pages in, and it wasn't until probably like 130 pages in that there was even a murder on page. I didn't have any 1 stars this month, but I did have a couple of 2 stars. The first one is Uncharted Waters by Sally Hepworth, and this one kind of breaks my heart a little bit because if you know anything about me, you know that I love Sally Hepworth's work, but this one was a short story in an Audible original series, and I don't even honestly remember what it was about that much. I know it followed this woman and her husband who were supposed to go on a cruise, and the husband ended up not being able to go. So the woman goes, and there's another woman that she meets on the cruise, and she finds out that like there was an affair with that woman and her husband, and things ensue from there. But I don't really know, that may be the gist of what happened. And yeah, I don't really remember anything else other than that. It was very lackluster for me. I would not recommend picking that up. If you haven't tried Sally Hepworth, I wouldn't want that to be your first book by her or a novella because it is a short story. I would just say it's skippable. I gave it a 2 stars. It was okay. And I think really what it is with Sally's books is her characters are always top notch. And in a short story, you don't really have a lot of time for those characters to develop. So there was also an element in the story that is just something I don't like to read about. So that also lessened my enjoyment. So again, overall, this was just a 2-star read for me. The second book that I read that was 2 stars is Dear Mr Henshaw by Beverly Cleary, and this book was just kind of a book I picked up on a whim because I needed to listen to a book on audio that was going to be a, like, what is it called, like an epistolary novel, so it was entirely written in letters, and I was trying to complete a challenge for a summer bingo board, and that is why I chose this one. I had never read this particular book by Beverly Cleary, but I did read a lot of her books growing up, especially The Mouse and the Motorcycle. I read that book so many times and have reread it as an adult because it's one of my favorites. So I thought this would be at least a 3-star for me, but overall, I just thought it was okay. It wasn't super fleshed out, and I think that was probably because of the nature of it being written in letters. I have loved some books written in letters. This just was a miss for me. Moving on to my 3-star reads, I did have one, and that was What Have You Done by Shari Lapena. This is my first and probably will be my only book by this author, just because I feel like she's kind of a mediocre thriller author or a mid-range thriller author for me. Nothing super special about like what she writes. I hate to say that because it sounds like I'm being rude, but I just mean that it's kind of average. There's nothing that she's doing that nobody else hasn't already done. So I just don't really feel like I'm going to continue with her stuff, but I did pick this up for Jessie from Reading with Jess's Sleep When I'm Dead book club. I was a co-host this month along with Hannah from the Teacher's TBR, and we read this book and we all felt pretty similarly about it. We all 3 gave it 3 stars. And it was like an enjoyable read. It wasn't the worst book I've ever read or anything. It just was mid of the road for me. It's about this small town where nothing ever goes wrong. People like let their kids go out and like stay out late and they don't worry about them. They leave their doors unlocked. Like it's a very friendly town where everybody knows everybody. But then one day a farmer finds this girl lying dead in his field and everybody starts to question like, okay, maybe this town isn't as safe as we once thought it was. And you get to follow a bunch of different people from the community's perspectives and kind of see where they were. There's a lot of icky men in this book. So if icky men are something that you don't like, don't read this book. But there are lots of viable suspects around this girl's murder. But I will say I did feel like I knew who it was from the very beginning based on how the author wrote the story. So it wasn't super shocking for me, and I just wanted a little bit more from it. Now we're moving on to books that I actually own and can hold up. So this next one is a little bit of a heartbreak for me. This is going to be a 3.5 star read for me. This is one of my most anticipated books of the year. I was so excited for it, and while it wasn't a 5-star prediction, I thought at least it would be a 4, but I am sad to say this is probably going to be in my most disappointing books of the year, and that is Wisteria by Adalyn Grace. This is the 3rd book in the Belladonna series, and I have absolutely adored this series. You all have heard me talk about it for the last couple of years. I loved Belladonna so much. I gave it 4 stars, but it's only because there was a lull in the middle. And then the second book, Foxglove, was my favorite in this series, and I gave it 5. But this book just really fell flat for me. So if you know nothing about the series, just know that it follows Signa Farrow, who is a girl who can see death, and she takes belladonna berries, and she is able to kind of like see through the veil a little bit and have a little bit different of a life than other people. Also, don't recommend eating belladonna berries. They are poisonous. So she just has a little bit different of a life. You learn about her and what makes her the way that she is. There's also a little bit of a murder mystery. There's a little bit of reminiscence of The Secret Garden in this book. It has very gothic vibes. It is a gothic romantasy between Signa and death, and I absolutely love the series so much. But I will say that as it has gone on, there are plot holes that I've seen, and especially in this book, I feel like the whole first half, I was just waiting on something to happen. You have something that's going on in this book that you as the reader know about, but the characters don't know about it until halfway through the book. So that was a big lull for me. And then when things started happening, I feel like they happened so fast. There wasn't a lot of backstory and there wasn't a lot of meat to it. And I would have appreciated a lot more of that. So I will say Adalyn Grace is a pro at writing an atmospheric read and making you fall in love with her characters. But I just wanted a little bit more of a fleshed out plot and explanation for some of the things in her story. But I still think that this is a great series. Overall, the 3 books in the Belladonna series that I've read are like overall as a whole an average of a 4-star rating for me, so I would still recommend it, but I will just say that Wisteria was a little bit of a disappointment for me. Next, we're going to talk about my 4-star reads, and the first one is Small Beach Murder by Alicia Bessette. This is a summery cozy mystery set in the Outer Banks that I have had on my shelves for at least a couple of years now, so I was really glad to finally get to it. This is the first book in the Outer Banks Bookshop Mystery Series. I love a good bookish mystery or a bookish story. So this follows our main character. Her name is Callie, and she has just recently come back to her hometown of Cattail Island and lands a gig at a local bookshop. And there's a little bit of a history behind why she left home and why she's not there. And there is a lighthouse here where we know that her mother died. And now there has been another death there, and she's wondering if it's related, or she's wondering if it was a suicide or if it was an actual murder. So she starts to investigate. I did think this was a really atmospheric read. I love a good atmospheric cozy mystery. I think Alicia Bessette is a great writer. It didn't quite hit the 5-star mark for me, but it was a 4-star read. I did enjoy it. I may read the second book in the series. I think there's only 2. I think it's called Murder at Mustang Beach. I may read that one, but it's not top on my priority list, but I can definitely recommend this one. The next 4-star read I have is Peculiar Woods, The Mystery of the Intelligence by Andres J. Colmenares. This is an author that I followed on Instagram before I picked up his graphic novels. He is at Wawa Weewa Comics on Instagram, and I love his artwork. It is very sweet and whimsical, and sometimes has life lessons thrown throughout too, or at least like really relatable things. The first book in the Peculiar Woods series, I gave 5 stars. It is very reminiscent, to me at least, for The Brave Little Toaster. So if you grew up with The Brave Little Toaster and you like the idea of inanimate objects becoming animated and funny little like quirky moments and one-liners and little life lessons thrown throughout, I definitely recommend checking out this graphic novel. I love the artwork in this. It is one of my favorite things. Let me see if I can find a really good set of artwork. I mean, honestly, all of it is so good, but I love these characters and I love following them and seeing what types of adventures they get up to. I didn't love this one as much as the first book, but I still think it was great. I gave it 4 stars and I will continue in the series. The next 4-star read for me is a really high 4-star. Honestly, I might even give it a 4.5, and that is The Circus of Stolen Dreams by Lorelei Savaryn. I have been putting this book off for so long. It is a spooky middle grade book by an author that I've really enjoyed in the past. She wrote The Edge of In-Between, which was like a little bit spookier of a secret garden reimagining with a lot of grief exploration. And this story was also really great, and it had a little bit of a grief exploration, but more so like just loss, or there was even more of an overarching theme of just understanding that life is going to have hard things, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop living life, that life is still worth living, even pushing through those hard things. And I did not expect the story that came out of this. I didn't expect the life lessons, but she just does such a phenomenal job of weaving life lessons in her stories that are really going to tug at your heartstrings. This particular story follows our main character. Her name is Andrea, and her brother Francis went missing a couple years ago, and now her parents are trying to clear out his room, and she is just not accepting of it. She's still really grieving his loss. They don't really know what happened to Francis, so she doesn't really have that closure. So one day she is out and about in the woods near her house, and she finds this sign that is actually on the back of the book, and it says, "Reverie, land of dreams. Come and join us. Come away. Forget your troubles. Come and play." So she ends up going into Reverie, which is a little bit like a carnival or a circus. There are lots of tents, but there is a price to come into Reverie. You either have to give up one of your dreams, one of your nightmares, or one of your memories. And Andrea decides to give up a memory that has been haunting her for quite some time. Then she goes into Reverie and finds out that while there are lots of fun dreams, like with pirates and a dream being able to fly and all these fun things, Reverie does have a dark side, and she starts to uncover that. Again, this is such a great story. Honestly, I teetered a little bit between giving it a 4 and a 5 star, but I landed on a 4 overall. I do highly recommend anything by this author, and I'm really excited about her upcoming release. I think it's later this month. Next up, I have a 4.5 star read, and that is A Cross Country Wedding by Courtney Walsh. I am obsessed with Courtney Walsh. If you have been here for any amount of time on my channel, you will already know that this is my favorite author of all time. Courtney Walsh hits it out of the park for me every single time. She writes my perfect romance. I love everything she does. It's always a sweet, clean rom-com. You don't have to worry about cursing. You don't have to worry about smut. There is a little bit of angst and like maybe a little bit of innuendos every now and then, but overall this is a sweet, clean read. All of her books are this way, and I absolutely love them. She also usually weaves themes of grace and second chances in her books, which I additionally love because that just reminds me of the love of Jesus and the grace and love that he has for us. I also love the characters that she writes. She usually writes dual point of view as well, which makes it even more impactful to read because you get inside each of the characters' heads. There's always a lot of sweet one-liners and witty banter, so I highly recommend picking up anything by her. But this particular book is the sequel or companion novel to A Cross Country Christmas, and I do recommend reading A Cross Country Christmas first. That was a 5-star read for me, and actually my first Courtney Walsh book. But the reason I say you should read it first is because this follows characters from that book, but mostly you need to know like what happened in the first book. I'm just going to say that. There's a road trip that happens in the first book, and this is kind of reminiscing on some of that. So I don't think you're going to get as much out of this book if you don't read that one first. But this book is following the best friends of the characters from the first book. So in this book, we are following Maddie and Simon. And Maddie and Simon have been best friends since college, but Maddie has friends on Simon. He has always been like head over heels for her since the moment he met her, but they've just been best friends. But now Maddie needs him, as she always does, and they end up going on this cross-country wedding road trip for their best friends, and they end up falling in love along the way. This is such a good story. I related so much with Maddie, and I find that I relate with a lot of Courtney's characters. Even this one, I started off not knowing if I was going to like this romance as much because the characters were a little bit insufferable, but you just have to trust the process and trust Courtney because she is going to make it turn around every single time. And there's just always something, again, about her characters that I find that I relate to. So I honestly wonder if she writes a little bit of herself in her stories, because I feel like, girl, we need to be besties. If this is any part of you, we need to be besties because she writes so many phenomenal things in this story and in other stories that she's written. So anything by her, I recommend. This was a 4.5 star read, and I cannot wait to pick up more from her. All right, we are going to end it out with my 5-star reads of the month. I had 3, which is kind of crazy, and 2 of these books are ones that I ended up reading twice because I wanted to go back and annotate them. So I'm going to very briefly talk about these because I'm sure you've seen them all over the internet for the past few years, as well as recently with the new release of the movie. But I read It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover, and like I said, I read them twice and went back and annotated them. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. Just know this is a story about a girl who grew up in a family of domestic abuse, and then she gets out on her own, is trying to make her own way, and finds herself in a very similar situation. At its heart, this is a love story, but it's also about overcoming abuse and like helping the reader understand what it's like to be in an abusive relationship and how hard it is to get out of that. But this is just a really beautiful story. Is it hard to read at times? Yes, but I think that in spite of the fact that Colleen Hoover has smut in her books and heavy language, which are two things that I really don't like, I could not give this any less than 5 stars because I saw the message that she was trying to get across, and I just found that it was really impactful for me, and it changed my life, and it changed the way I look at people in relationships like this. And yeah, it made me cry, and it just completely gripped me. And there was also a character in this book that you follow more in the second book, and I'm so glad that we got more of him because he was just the bee's knees and the sweetest little knight in shining armor of a character. So I really loved both of these books and how they ended, how they dealt with trauma. And yeah, I do recommend them, but like I said, if you don't like smut or heavy language in your books, you may not like these. But again, I don't typically like that, but I suffered through it because these stories were worth it for me. So absolutely loved them. They are definitely probably going to be my favorite books of the year. I don't always like Colleen Hoover's books, and I probably won't read too many more of her books, if any, but this is why we never say never on my channel, because sometimes they just hit. And the last 5-star read and the last book that I'm going to talk about that I read this month is Hind's Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard. This is a Christian allegory and a bit of a classic. I think it was written originally in the 1970s. And this is a story about a character named Much Afraid, and she lives in the Valley of Humiliation with her fearing relatives. But she often goes to this spring or this stream or whatever it is that she meets with the chief shepherd and ends up having a conversation with him, and he tells her that he can take her to high places. He can give her hinds feet to get on these high places if she will just trust him and follow him. So she goes on this incredible journey, and there's a lot of, like grief on the way there. There are some trials and tribulations, but ultimately this is just a beautiful story of what the Christian walk looks like and what trusting in the Lord looks like. This story is based on Habakkuk 3:19, which says, "The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places." I cannot recommend this book enough, and I especially recommend getting the version that I have, which is the engaging visual journey, which has beautiful artwork that I think really elevates this story. And it also has little scripture in there. It has little journaling sections if you want to do that, and there are just so many great things about this story. I'm so glad that I read it. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I felt like I resonated with the character of Much Afraid so much. I ended up reading this for Krista from Books and Jams Christian read along that she's been doing quarterly over on her YouTube channel, and she did do some live stream discussions on this book with some other creators. So if you do read this and you want to kind of have some commentary on it along with your read, I highly recommend going back and watching her lives. And those are going to be all the books that I read in the month of August. You'll have to let me know what your favorite book that you read this month was. I think mine is probably going to be a tie between two totally opposite books, and that is Hind's Feet on High Places and It Ends With Us. But honestly, and I hate to even say this because they were both great, I know this book impacted me so much that I read it twice. So it's probably going to be this book being my favorite of the month, because it's, like I said, going to be my favorites of the year, though this one probably will be too. But I loved it so much. So let me know what your favorite book was that you read in the month of August. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, friends.